Hola, muy buenas tardes, bienvenidas, bienvenidos, bienvenides a esta fantástica conferencia que vamos a recibir y se está transmitiendo a través de TV UNAM. Vamos a tener el placer de contar con la conferencia dada por la doctora Vivienne Ming. Ella es una neurocientífica cuyo objetivo es explorar problemas que parecen no tener respuesta. Ella es, junto con su esposa, Norma Ming, fundó una incubadora de ciencia loca, así les gusta llamarse, y ya verán por qué, que se llama Socoslab. Y su interés es cómo maximizar la capacidad humana como teoría neurocientífica y en problemas aparentemente intratables, desde la discapacidad de un hijo solitario hasta la inclusión de la economía mundial. La doctora Vivienne Ming inició su vida profesional como becaria en el Centro Redwood de Neurociencia Teórica de UC Berkeley, investigando sobre neuroprótesis cognitivas. Vivienne Ming trabaja para diseñar sistemas de inteligencia artificial para ayudar a tratar la diabetes de su hijo y predecir episodios maníacos en enfermos bipolares. Es asesora de diversas organizaciones importantes a nivel mundial como Credit Suisse, Cornerstone Capital y Bayes Impact. Sus investigaciones e inventos han sido publicados y reseñados en The Financial Times, The Atlantic, Quartz Revista y el New York Times. Vivienne Ming fue nombrada una de las 10 mujeres a seguir en tecnología por Inc. Magazine y una de las 100 mujeres a seguir por la BBC en 2017. Es un placer y un honor tener con nosotros, doctora Ming. You are very, very welcome. And I let you with her.
Oh, my goodness. Hola a todos. That will be the end of my terrible Spanish for the evening, or possibly we might insert a little in as we go. I have been looking at some of the posters for the festival up around campus, and also looking at you here and thinking I might do a little switcheroo on my talk. It is listed as a talk about using artificial intelligence to improve collective intelligence. How can we all be smarter together? And I'll talk about that. But I actually thought just the tagline of the conference, artificial intelligence and other intelligence, and trying to understand the difference between how we think and how current bleeding edge of artificial intelligence thinks would actually be really useful. Having said all of that, anyone who's here because they want a deep technical dive into machine learning and artificial intelligence, please stay around and come talk to me afterwards. I would be thrilled to answer any questions about anything I talk about, or if you happen to have the misfortune of knowing my research, or me for that matter, anything else. But instead, I wanted to start with something different. For a minute, it won't even feel like we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, because I think the most important question I can ask you that's relevant to how AI might affect all of our lives is, ¿qué tal? How are you doing? Are you happy? And maybe even more importantly, if you weren't, what would you do about it? And the reason why this is such an important question, such a fascinating question, is because research about intelligence and happiness has this rather astounding finding. Intelligence doesn't predict happiness. We could look at all of us in this room Here at a grand university, I'm sure some of us are quite clever. If we looked across all of the different people and we went and measured all the different ways people measure intelligence in the academic world. IQ, we don't use so much anymore, but there's a modern version of it called G, or working memory span. How many things can you keep in mind at any given moment? How many different things can you attend to? So all of these different ways to measure our raw cognitive power. And none of them correlate in any way with happiness. What a strange finding. There are many things to do. People that are more resilient in their lives tend to be happier. People that have better communication skills tend to be happier. People that have a strong sense of purpose and life meaningfulness are substantially happier than those that don't. Why not intelligence? Every one of those things I just mentioned, purpose, resilience, communication skills, they're predictive of a wide range of life outcomes. How much money you'll earn in your lifetime, how far you'll go in your education. But unlike intelligence, which is a strong predictor of both of those, they also predict happiness. What's going on there? Will AI never be happy because it's only intelligence? Or maybe we're measuring intelligence wrong. Maybe our own understanding of our own intelligence has been profoundly misinformed. And it's affecting our understanding of this new form of intelligence that mad scientists like me are bringing into the world. So let's think about how we measure intelligence, how people are publishing papers doing this with new artificial intelligence like large language models, GPT, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, all these others, but also with our own children. What do? We give them a test, and that test has right and wrong answers. It could be a fairly simple test. It could be a test that's specifically designed to be invariant to language skills or cultural bias, like Raven's progressive matrices. But still, these are tests that have explicitly right and wrong answers. And the more right answers you could give, the smarter you are. Interestingly, we might call this kind of a test, this kind of a problem, it's a well-posed problem. It's a well-posed question. It's a question that has an explicitly right answer. And so if we're measuring people and how well they can answer questions that have right answers, then we're measuring how well they can answer well-posed questions, well-posed problems. 25 years of my career, I've never worked on a well-posed problem. Overwhelmingly, the problems that are of interest to society, to America, to Mexico, to us in our individual lives are ill-posed problems, problems that don't have defined right answers. If you weren't happy, what would you do to change that? That doesn't have a right answer. It's, in fact, it's been well studied, and it will be different for almost everyone in this room. You would need to know yourself. You'd need to know your context. You have to change everything you plan to do in response to a very complicated world. Why does all this matter? Because artificial intelligence, and the way that we have built it to date, is fundamentally designed to solve well-posed questions. By its very nature. Let's do a little walkthrough. I think you've gone through 2 weeks of festival, but just in case anyone wants a quick tutorial on artificial intelligence, as we talked about earlier today, it's any autonomous system that can answer questions under uncertainty. So uncertainty doesn't necessarily mean that a problem is ill-posed. It could mean, is this little blob on an X-ray cancer or just an artifact of the machine? It could mean, in this contract, how many flaws are there that an opposing lawyer could exploit? These, on some level, are well-posed questions in that they have explicit answers to them. You might need an advanced law degree to read that contract and see where the flaws are. On the other hand, you may not be able to describe, as most doctors can, what about the blob makes it look like cancer to you versus this other blob. But we can take lots of images of cancerous X-rays and lots of images of X-rays that don't have cancer in them, and we can label one as cancer and the other as not, and give them to an algorithm and have it learn and learn and learn to distinguish between them. And in that sense, still fundamentally, this is a well-posed question. We have all the data we need. We have all the right answers. We even know the question that we're asking. Is this X-ray indicative of cancer? That's a serious skill to have. But now we live in a world where machines can do that skill increasingly competitive to us and beyond competitive. In a recent paper published, a group used large language models, and it didn't matter what one. So these are massive AIs, some of the biggest that have ever existed. Trillions and trillions of individual equations getting computed to produce a next word. You give it some words, and it predicts the next word. It's the world's largest autocomplete. And while it may feel like I'm selling GPT short, I'm not. What's astonishing about it is what that simple mechanism can do. Just by producing the next word, it, for example, can read a contract, find all of the legal flaws, equitable to a working professional lawyer, and instead of taking 2 hours, it takes 30 seconds. If you work out the math on that, as published in this paper, the similar effectiveness for identifying problems in contracts, the AI is 99.97% less expensive than a human lawyer. That just sounds scary. Scary if you're in law school. Scary if you're in med school. And by the way, that wasn't just GPT that could do it. Every one of the large language models, including Lambda, the version that's free and open source out in the world, could also beat the human lawyers. So is this the end of the game? Well, this is why I wanted to talk today about the differences between human and machine intelligence. It's not just about whether you can answer well-posed questions. It's about the messy uncertainty of the real world. It turns out that's what's fascinating about us. So let me take a little detour now that I've framed where I want to take this, and say, I love working with artificial intelligence. I built my first model very long ago, at least in the world of AI, 25 years ago. 25 years ago, I was an undergrad. I thought I was going to stick wires into cat brains and be a wet neuroscientist and understand how the brain works. And I took my first and only programming course, and the professor in that course recommended me to work at this place called the Machine Perception Lab, where we were building an AI that would analyze people's faces in real time and tell whether or not they were lying. If you're curious, we've been given a bunch of money by the CIA. So sometimes that's what happens in your life. A bunch of spies give you money to make super intelligent machines that can tell if people are lying. But we were just doing basic science research. What could we actually do? And it was amazing. I could build a machine that could tell if someone was smiling or not. And I thought, what could I do with this? How could you make a difference in the world with something like this, even if the original money came from an organization that not everybody in the world loves, and for very good reason? Later in my career, I had the chance to take what I learned building those original models, and I built a system for Google Glass. It could find someone, read their facial expression, write the expression in the little heads-up display. Now, there's all sorts of terrible things you could do with this. Many bankers have asked me, could we get this for all of our tellers, and then whenever anyone comes in, it would just float everybody's credit score above their head, so I'd know whether or not they would qualify for a loan before I've ever even talked to them. Suffice to say, I'm not interested in that. We built this for autistic children. It turned out that when an autistic kid had the chance to talk face to face in a natural social interaction, but they were told what the expression was, something they don't get for free. Autism is complex. Some kids are better at these than others, but at its heart, autistic children often have incredibly hard times reading facial expressions. So if you could build this thing, and while they're interacting with the people around them, they could read their facial expression or get a signal to teach them how. And that was the amazing thing. Not only did these kids learn how to read facial expressions better than the standard, which at the time and still is today, cartoon faces on flashcards. So you just show them a face. This is happy, this is sad. Now they were interacting with an actual person that was smiling or frowning. And they learned even better. And not only that, they learned theory of mind, empathy. Turned out it's really hard to learn why other people do what they do if they're all speaking a secret language you do not. So I got to take artificial intelligence and help these children understand what makes other people happy and sad. Again, fundamentally a human experience. Later, I took the work I'd done doing facial modeling and did something even bigger. I built a game, a really terrible game of which I would be so ashamed, but you need to wait for the end of the story. This game was called Sexy Face. And it was online, and if you went onto the Sexy Face website, our promise was pick out the faces you think are sexy. It would just pick random people out of Facebook and Flickr. That dates it a little bit for those of you who are old enough to remember that. It would just pick out these random faces and put them up there, and you pick the faces you think are sexy. And for free, we'll find everyone on Facebook that you think is sexy. And for $5, we'll find everyone who thinks you're sexy. Now, if I am a horrible person, and that's still a reasonable thing to be wondering about, it's not because of that. After you played a couple of rounds, it then confessed, actually, we're Trojan, which means we're a secret game. We're an AI, and this is a mind-reading game. So not just sexy faces, any face. Come up with any face category you can think of, and we'll guess it. And so you think, I don't know, Southeast Asian with a wispy mustache and a sense of ennui. The amazing thing is that our network actually learned how to distinguish these faces. It could really find a face based on someone's hidden idea of what it is. And it turns out even this game wasn't the end of the story. The end of story is a book. It's a book with 1 million photographs in it. It is a book that is likely filling up with photographs right now as we speak. It is the UN Refugee Program's book of orphan refugees. And when we did this project now over 10 years ago, it had 1 million photographs in it of kids in refugee camps all around the world, right there and then. So, if you were fearing the worst, and you hadn't heard from your sister's family, and you drove all the way outside your country to a refugee camp nearby, and you go to them, they would give you this book, and you start leafing through it, hoping you don't find your niece, hoping you do find your niece. We took the AI that was trained by people playing our very stupid game. And we used it to further train an AI on the faces of all of these children. And we built a system that could run on a little tablet, and it would pull 18 random kids out of the book, and it would show their faces, and you'd pick the ones that look more like your niece. And then it would pull up a next set of faces based on your past responses. And in about 3 to 5 minutes, if your niece is in a camp anywhere in the world, you found her. I love working with AI. Not because I love geeking out about the mathematics of artificial intelligence, although there are moments when that is fun. Not because I love gnarly data problems or I'm a fabulous engineer. I am not. I am a scientist. I have never written a line of code that didn't involve 32 curse words for every single function word I put into the code. I love it because of what it can do, what we can choose to do with it. Yeah, we built an AI that the CIA wanted to use to tell if people were lying. But we also built systems to help autistic children learn how to read facial expressions and to reunite orphan refugees with their extended family through a program called Refugees United. That's what got me excited about working in this space. And over the years, I founded companies and I've published research in theoretical neuroscience related to our brains and artificial intelligence. But still, what always really drove me along was the idea that you could change a life and that that would be valuable. One of my current companies has the first ever biological test for postpartum depression. And it's predictive. So before a mom ever even gives birth, before she ever experiences the first symptoms, we can actually see in your epigenetics the biological signal for postpartum depression and begin treatment before it affects you. This is the most common complication in pregnancy. In the United States, it is the single most common reason women die in childbirth is related to complications in postpartum depression, including suicide. And we can predict it. And it would be impossible to do this without AI. In this case, a deep neural network that analyzes all the epigenetic data and makes the predictions that we need to be able to make. But we didn't stop there. The large language models, ChatGPT and others, we built a version of that that can also just talk with moms. Talk with them before they're even pregnant. Just talk with women. And in those conversations, we have a completely separate AI that's analyzing their speech patterns and turns out can also independently predict depression and suicide risk. Being able to work on projects like these and bring them out into the world is immensely powerful. But you'll notice in none of these cases that I build something that just kind of got turned loose on the world. And there's a reason for that. And it's a reason that has become very salient in the world of generative AI, which, if there are any nerds in the room, is a very frustrating term for me because generative modeling already means something different mathematically. And so now, for some reason, we're calling this kind of AI the exact same word that isn't mathematically applicable. It drives a nerd like me up the wall. But I think we all know what I'm talking about. The chatbots that you can now talk to, the models that can create an image out of nothing. And they're amazing. They are huge breakthrough advances. I will not sell them short. GPT and Gemini truly can surpass human medical students in answering medical questions, and most average doctors as well. And wouldn't it be amazing for all of those people that don't have access to an immediate doctor to be able to ask questions and get answers? But here's the flip side. Now that we've come full circle, and why I started this story with this question that didn't seem to have anything to do with artificial intelligence. Are you happy? And how do you become happy? Because we might do one of two things right now. We might look at AI being able to do all of these amazing things and give up. Just leave it to jerks like Vivienne to invent things, and they'll do all of the work and solve all the problems. You definitely shouldn't trust me to do anything, but that is an option, a choice that could be made. Another, and let me promise you, there are 1,000 startups trying to replace every job that universities are currently training students to do. It's important to understand that. But the other big problem is that we start using AI, now that it's no longer just the domains of the mad scientists like me, now that it is something all of us can interact with, all of us can talk to. Now what we're wondering is, are we going to keep trying as hard as we should be trying? Are we going to put in the effort in our lives when we don't have to? When something else can put the effort in for us? So let's go back to this idea that I brought up earlier, that there are ill-posed problems in the world and there are well-posed problems in the world, and that artificial intelligence is quickly surpassing human beings at solving well-posed problems. And wonder, why is that still how we're educating our children? Why are we raising generations of kids to answer routine questions when all of us in this room, in our pocket, have the answers to those questions for free? Instead, we should be building kids for the unknown. We should be building them to solve ill-posed questions. We need a generation of explorers. Because the one thing, at least for now, that natural intelligence does and artificial intelligence does not is explore the unknown. Now, let me be clear, I use AI regularly to explore the unknown. I actually had a question. This may be a question of zero interest to the majority of you, but in a way that's part of the point. What is the confidence interval of the product of two regression model parameters? It's obviously not a question that pops up in most of our day-to-day lives. It's not a question that actually even pops up in the day-to-day lives of most scientists. Even statisticians might have to think hard about, well, gosh, what is the equation to compute the confidence interval? Well, fortunately, we have GPT and Gemini, so I asked them, and they were wrong. If you want to know one simple takeaway lesson for how you should interact with large language models like GPT, they know everything and they understand nothing. GPT knows so much more than I do. Despite how much study I have, despite my fancy degrees, despite my years of research, it just knows more than me. It's encoded in those trillions of parameters that are predicting the next word. But it doesn't understand anything that it knows. That isn't a knock on it. What it can do is amazing. But when I asked it for the answer to this problem, which, by the way, is in fact a well-posed problem, just a very esoteric one, a very weird and unusual one, it gave me the wrong answer. It gave me the answer to another more common problem. It's another thing to understand about large language models and generative image models. They are the best of the average of the internet. Turns out the average of the internet doesn't typically have to know what the confidence interval of the product of two model parameters is. And so its first answer was wrong. It answered a much simpler question. But I didn't give up on it. I stuck with it. And we talked it out. Now, I didn't talk it out like it was a person, but at the same time, I did engage with it the way I might engage with one of my graduate students. My graduate students, whatever they're studying, they actually know it better than me. They're invested in it. I talk to them an hour a week about this issue. They're fully invested in it. This is their dissertation. This is their ticket to whatever is coming next. And they know it so much more than I do. But they don't understand it. That's what I'm bringing to that relationship, is an understanding of the implications of what they're discovering and trying to guide them towards a similar understanding. When I interact with GPT or Gemini, I treat it the same way. It knows everything, it understands nothing. And so I said, no, you've misunderstood my problem. You've actually given me the confidence interval to the product of two random variables. I know this is super exciting to everyone, but that's what it did. And so I slowly walked it through the problem. I didn't know the equation that I was looking for. Interestingly, neither did it. But about a half an hour later, we had the actual equation written out and correct, and the code written out in the programming language Python to execute that on my data. Something I couldn't have done by myself, and nor could it. That's what excites me about AI, isn't what can AI go do by itself. I'm too busy to write emails to all of my business acquaintances. I don't have the time to write an essay. I don't want to have to think about the art I'm putting in my presentation. Let AI do it for you. No, please don't make that choice. Think about what you could do better using AI as a tool. It's not a magic wand. It is also not intelligent the way we are intelligent. Again, it's not a knock. It is astonishing what it can do. But it doesn't understand the world. That's your job. That's our job. Instead of building a generation of students ready to answer tough questions that this can do so much more easily, we should build a generation of students that know how to find good questions. A generation of students that when their first try doesn't work, they don't give up. They keep trying because they have a belief that their hard work will actually pay off. None of that applies to artificial intelligence today. This little interlude is just going to be for the nerds in the room. There is a famous difference in human learning that is identified in both neuroscience and psychology called model-free and model-based learning. And model-free is basically just statistics. And we, in our brains, definitely do a huge amount of model-free learning. And essentially, that's what most of AI is. It's just a bunch of raw correlations, churned and churned and churned. Interestingly, on masses of data that no human could ever interact with, there's a whole other class of artificial intelligence called reinforcement learning models, the most famous of which would be AlphaGo, the AI that beat the world's best human Go players. And since then, Deep Brain, the Google subsidiary, has gone on to use AlphaGo to create AlphaFold and to create the new system that can discover all these proteins. But in all of these cases, it's just blindly exploring. In a single night, the reinforcement learning system from AlphaGo can play something on the order of 180 years of human experienced Go. In a single night. It plays so many Go games against itself. It's as though a human being played it with, only breaking to sleep for 186 years. It's not so surprising that it does better than we do. But does it truly understand Go? I mean, it would keep playing Go if the game was Baccarat. It would keep playing Go if the house was burning down. It turns numbers into numbers. That's a powerful tool, but it's not the ability to explore the unknown. Let me ratchet this up another level. A lot of research has looked at human workers using large language models to speed up their work. Published papers, some of them by OpenAI itself, others by notable economists at Harvard and Stanford and beyond. So, for example, let's start at what economists would see as the low end of the skills ladder, call centers. You're working in a call center. Someone calls up, you take their call, you essentially have a script, and you just run through the script to try and answer their questions. And what they found was when call center workers had a large language model helping them answer the questions, they were 40% better, 40% more productive. They answered 40% more calls and had fewer referrals to their manager. They were better. Now let's take a step further and look at programmers. Maybe I'm not being fair. Many people go to university to learn how to program. Many people learn how to program completely on their own. It's a little unclear. This was certainly the skill of the future not 5 years ago. Certainly 10 years ago, every policy paper in the world, from the UN, from the World Economic Forum, the White House, McKinsey, every major country had a policy paper and it said we need to teach every kid how to program. Well, guess what? We live in a world in which AI can program. And I could have told you that 10 years ago, and I did. I didn't tell you, but I told everyone writing these policy papers. What a crazy thing. Imagine you had asked me, what is the world financial markets going to do for the next 30 years? And I said, don't worry about it. Simply take all of your money, buy nothing but this one stock, and then never change it. The logic is about the same. Teach everyone in the world how to program, because that will be a protected skill. Programming is routine knowledge. It's a solution to well-posed problems. People can do creative things with programming, but the actual core of programming is routine. And AI can do that, and do it very well. So programmers using large language models to help them program, again, about 40% faster with fewer errors. Now we'll step up professional writers with university educations. Again, they're faster and they produce better work. Boston Consulting Group, consultants with very fancy degrees from elite universities. And they're asked to analyze spreadsheets of data and produce a report, a written report, and then a set of slides for a presentation. And some of them are given GPT to use, and some of them aren't. And unsurprisingly, the ones using GPT are faster and produce higher quality work, just the same as all of the other workers. Well, but there's two incredibly important missing parts to this story. One, in every one of these stories, it wasn't everyone that received the boost. Only the least experienced and lowest skill workers. Interestingly, at every skill level, the people that already knew how to do the job didn't actually get benefit from using AI. That's really interesting. Particularly if I add in this additional twist from the world of education, where we've been studying using AI for decades. If an AI tutor ever gives the students the answer, they never learn anything. Well, wait a minute. Isn't that exactly what's happening with these workers? Where the new career workers are starting their jobs and the AI is telling them what to do? I promise you, they will never learn how to do their job any better than they're doing it the day they show up. The idea that we should simply offload our effort and our work to AI robs us of the chance to grow. But there's even a bigger issue, which is in the Boston Consulting study, there was one additional test. Because their job doesn't end with analyze the spreadsheet, which is a well-posed problem, and write a report, which shouldn't be a well-posed problem. But I don't know how many of you have done a business report. You might as well let an AI write it. They read exactly the same every time. So what was after that is they then had to say, what should their client do about the analysis that they just ran? And so now we've moved from well-posed to ill-posed. We've moved into a world in which there isn't a right answer. And in fact, very cleverly, the researchers set it up so that GPT would give them the wrong answer. And the people using the AI did worse than the people that weren't, when it became a creative task. That should scare all of us. We are uniquely good, for now, at exploring the unknown. But these highly educated, highly motivated workers, when given an AI tool, stopped exploring and just did what it told them to. So how do we reverse this trend? How do we get the benefits of artificial intelligence? And again, I can just braggingly describe my own work. Autistic children, they can learn how to read facial expressions. Orphan refugees, reunited with their extended family. I built the first ever system that could predict bipolar episodes, manic episodes in bipolar sufferers. My company has the first test ever for manic depression. When my son, in 2011, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, I hacked all of his medical devices, broke, as it turns out, all sorts of US federal laws, and I developed the first ever AI for diabetes, just for my son. It sent updates to my Google Glass, which, believe it or not, I wore to a party at the White House. There is literally a Secret Service policy at the White House naming me, saying you can't wear live computers on your head in the White House anymore. But I did get to meet President Obama because of that, and after he met me and walked up, he actually walked up to me, looked straight at me, and just shook his head like I was such a disappointment. What, are you wearing a fluorescent blue computer on your face at my fancy party? But then I said, okay, Google, take a picture. So that was my voice-activated Google Glass. It took a picture of the president. Google has confirmed it is the only presidential portrait ever taken by Google Glass. It is a terrible picture. It did not improve his opinion of me, by the way. But then he said, why are you wearing this silly thing? And I said, because I built an artificial intelligence that's monitoring my son's diabetes. He's back in San Francisco. I'm on the other side of the continent in Washington, D.C. I just got a text message from my AI telling me my son's blood glucose levels would go dangerously low. So I sent a message back to my sister, who was watching after him. She gave him a cracker, and his blood glucose levels didn't go low. I built myself a superpower, something that every parent should have the chance to build. AI truly can do amazing things. We should have it in our lives, but we shouldn't use it to substitute for the things we can already do for ourselves. When I use artificial intelligence today, I use it in a peculiar way. Now, I'm not talking about the models I build for my research. All of those I'm building by hand, and I'm trying to solve specific problems and explore things I don't understand about the world. But when I use it as a regular person, for example, in using it to write on a book I'm working on right now, the worst thing I could do is say, GPT, write the next chapter of my book. I have actually tried. It writes garbage. It is a terrible writer. It gets the punctuation. Actually, I wish my students' spelling and punctuation was as good as GPT. Human beings turn out to be terrible at that, but it's so banal. It's so substanceless. Instead, I get to do something different when I engage with it. I write my own article, my own essay. Of course I do. In a world where all of the routine knowledge is available for free in your pocket, what's truly left for us is our unique voice. The way we see the world differently than anyone else, literally anyone else. And it is your resilience and your courage to use that voice that is your value to the people around you. So how do I use, in my case, Gemini, Google's version? I say, Gemini, you are my worst enemy. You have been hounding me for my entire career, finding every flaw in everything I've ever written. You are the reason I don't have a Nobel Prize, because you keep pointing out everything I've ever done that's wrong. Let's just pretend that that's true. Now, read my next essay and find for me all of the arrows, all of the things you might criticize. I'm not speeding up my writing. I'm slowing it down. I already went through and wrote the whole thing in a way that I was happy with, and now I have turned the AI against me to tell me all of the mistakes I made, all of the flaws that exist, all of the ways people might disagree with me. Now, I don't have to believe everything it says. I work with it like it's my grad student. It knows everything, doesn't understand everything. And so I take some of what it says. I ignore some of what it says because I don't think it understood. And it's what we call productive friction. Rather than using AI to make my life easier, I use AI to make myself better. That's what we should all be doing. Whether you are interested in building AI yourself, or you are interested simply in making use of it for your everyday life, ask yourself this very specific question. First, am I better when I'm using it? And then think, not just AI, but a lot of technologies, we might admit we're not really a better person when we use it. Feel free to interpret better person as you want, but for me, it means when I'm not so long from now, 65, will I still be alive? Will I have made lots of money? Will I have lots of friends? Will I be happy? Things we might all agree is a better life. Does this technology, when I'm using it, give me a better life? But here's the second question, and to me it's just as important. Am I a better person than when I started, when I turn it off again? And even amazing, useful technologies frequently follow that second test. And I have a whole story I can share about Google Maps and automated navigation and why it's an astonishing technology that is increasing dementia in everyone around the world. But I've run out of time, and so you'll have to ask me about it later or come chat with me after this event. It's been a lot of fun. I guess I never got back around to talking about collective intelligence, but so I'm going to do this one last little plug. When the pandemic started, I have a very strange life. In addition to my companies and my academic work, my real day job is running a philanthropic lab. People bring me challenging problems. And if I think my team and I can make a meaningful difference, I pay for everything, and whatever we invent, we give away. So it's the stupidest startup idea anyone's ever come up with. Endless demand, zero revenue, but it's also the best job in the entire world. And so people write me, and they say, my daughter has a life-threatening egg allergy. Please save her life. I say, our company has bias in its promotion process. Help us figure out where it's coming from. Our country's education system is failing our students, but we're doing everything we're supposed to do, and it still isn't helping. And again, if I think I have my unique voice, not because I'm smarter than everyone else, but because I'm different, and I've become very comfortable with being different, does my unique voice and insight have something to say about this problem? And if so, we just do it. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I got almost the identical question from two separate people, except they weren't people, they were giant multinational companies. Facebook and Amazon called me up and said, we just sent everyone home and we don't know what to do. And what we particularly don't know what to do is how to be inclusive and how to innovate through a camera. If everyone's life is going through a camera, and we never see one another, and we never have time to talk at the over beers or at the water cooler, where does that collective intelligence and the brilliance of people come from? And because I'm weird, I thought, that seems like a reasonable philanthropic project. I should help two of the largest, richest companies in the world answer that question. But as long as they're fine with me telling everyone what I found, then we dove in, and I got to see everybody's life going through those cameras, all of our interactions around documents. And we discovered that the smartest teams had three things in common. They were relatively small, 3 to 5 people. They had very flat hierarchies. There might be a Nobel Prize winner and an undergraduate intern. There might be the SVP of engineering and someone who's just there for the summer. It didn't matter. When they were collaborating, it all disappeared. And everyone took equal turns. Again, it is your unique voice that adds value to this world. And the last ingredient is that those teams were diverse. So I truly am now finally out of time, but I will simply say this sounded like a cool thing to build an artificial intelligence model for. not one that people would interact with, but one that we called the matchmaker. And we would look through a social network of people and find all of the matches to make and break, just as importantly, breaking social connections, to maximize the collective intelligence of teams. And what we found is you could double the innovative output of a team of people by just shifting around those connections dynamically using our AI system. And again, it was so exciting because it's another look not at how AI can replace us, but how it can make us better. In this case, not better as individuals, but by finding the community with which we share just enough trust and enough difference for the sparks to produce something truly amazing. So, I'm going to stop here, but again say, for anyone foolish enough to want to stay around and ask me questions, I am happy to spend as much time here afterwards as I can. Thank you all so very much. Muchas gracias.
I think
Estás utilizando las formas en que estás utilizando la inteligencia artificial con los niños, tanto con tu hijo como con los niños autistas, es maravillosa. Quiero preguntarte si has, en cuanto a este uso de la inteligencia artificial con niños, si has trabajado con niños que tienen hiperactividad.
Yeah, so I think a whole lot of people, like myself, have had diagnoses of ADHD, and interestingly, the comorbidity, the genetic underpinnings of many of these sort of track together. So ADHD, we certainly don't think of it as being as challenging as autism or even things like bipolar or schizophrenia, but you see similarities genetically and where it's emerging from. So yes, one of the things I'm looking at more in the neurotechnology side of my life, one of my companies has developed a neuromodulatory treatment for Alzheimer's. So the idea is we stimulate the brain in a way which tricks it into thinking it's working very, very hard. And this is good for Alzheimer's because it causes the brain, particularly support structures in the brain, glial cells and astrocytes, to help clean up accumulated byproducts of neural activity. And that clearly is helping with Alzheimer's. But it turns out this idea that you could stimulate a brain, and you can stimulate it, we're using light, so stroboscopic light at 40 hertz, 40 times per second, the light is flickering, or at 8 hertz. Or you can use electrical stimulation, alternating current transcranial stimulation, and some other methodologies. You can cause these the synchronized activity to speed up in the brain, and I've looked at traumatic brain injury in kids recovering working memory function. There's research looking in autism at enhancing functioning there and intracortical connectivity. So this seems to be one of the challenges with autism, is one part of the brain isn't talking to other wide-ranging areas as well as you might in people that were neurotypical, and certain kinds of stimulation seem to help with that. This is all very early. In ADHD, it's less clear exactly what the mechanism is, but it does seem that that 40 hertz stimulation seems to help, but it's unclear. Now I don't want to totally nerd out in front of everyone else, but one of the issues with ADHD might simply be that the resting state of your brain and another state, so what we call default mode network versus executive control network, that those two states of your brain are very distant in people that have difficulty, different kinds of difficulties. For example, inhibitory control, people that commit crimes a lot. looks like these states are very different. It's hard for them to shift to a control state when they suddenly have an impulse to do a thing. But what it seems like maybe with ADHD is that the saliency, the sort of sensory states, they're just very active and very close to the default state. And so as soon as you see something, it kind of takes over and takes you into a different place. So all I can really say is there is some exciting new work using neuromodulatory triggers, and there's generic artificial intelligence work from my lab and others looking at what sort of lived experiences, what sort of educational interventions are effective across different kids. So years ago, we released a system called Muse, which helps new parents with young children for socio-emotional development. And we were super excited and had all sorts of great results, but it was made for, not for average kid, because the whole point of the AI in our system was figure out who this child is and what experiences are right for them, not for someone else. But now we're collaborating with a group in Vancouver that specifically wants to take this explicitly to non-neurotypical. So ADHD and other, let's call them non-clinical level learning challenges. And I think there's a huge space of just being able to identify which behavioral therapies will actually be effective, as well as making space for doing non-invasive therapies that could also help as well. And you know, I don't want to rule out the possibility of pharmacological treatment, drug treatments helping, but I think the first step in most of these, the way I think of it as a computational neuroscientist, is I want to get these different states. I want to get the default state closer to the one we want and farther from the one that's causing the problem. And that's a very new way of thinking about this sort of a problem. And if you ever want to talk more, I'd be happy to follow up on it. But there is work in this space.
Muchas gracias.
The speech was
La plática fue
interesting.
muy interesante. Así que
My question is
mi
related
pregunta
to
se
such a kind
relaciona
of,
con cierto tipo de
worry.
preocupación.
At the very beginning of the
Al
speech,
principio
you
de su
mentioned,
plática usted mencionó
the truth and
la verdad.
happiness.
Que la
how can
felicidad,
you use,
habla de la
how
felicidad
can we teach
y cómo
using
podemos
the
enseñarle
artificial intelligence to
el uso de la
educate
inteligencia
people?
artificial para educar a la
In this
gente.
moment we are in the most
En
important
este
institution
momento
of education
estamos
of
en la
the country.
institución más
So,
importante
how can we
educativa en el
transmit the
país.
idea to-
¿Cómo podemos
to use
transmitir la
this
idea
intelligence?
de
How
transmitir
if
esta
we have the, in
inteligencia
fact,
si
the,
tenemos de hecho,
the use is to destroy
si el uso de esto es de
the
hecho
war,
para destruir, para la
the
guerra,
problems in the world that we have
para los problemas que
So we
confrontamos
are,
en el
notice
mundo.
that
Y
people
nos
in
damos
general is
cuenta
using, well, the
que
people
la
that take
gente en
the most
general
important
está
decisions in the
utilizando,
world
la gente que
is
toma
using
las
to this,
decisiones más importantes en
artificial
el mundo
intelligence to
está
destroy.
usando esta
So,
inteligencia artificial
related
para
to
la
education,
destrucción.
happiness,
Así que en
and the
relación a la
truth,
educación, a la
how can we
verdad, a la
confront
felicidad,
in
¿cómo
order
podemos
to,
confrontar todo eso para,
to attack it?
para atacarlo?
There is no doubt that two of the biggest consumers of artificial intelligence, though they will never admit it publicly, are the US and the Chinese military. But even aside from that, OpenAI and Microsoft, Google, Baidu in China, of 2 countries and maybe 6 companies effectively control the artificial intelligence infrastructure of the planet. It's not that there aren't other people doing interesting things with AI in the world. But if you're going to use a large language model, there are only so many that actually exist, and all of them are trained on the infrastructure of either Amazon, Google, or Baidu, or the internal infrastructure of a company like Facebook. So that's problematic. I have 2 answers to your question. One is an essay I just wrote, an op-ed that was published in the Financial Times of the United Kingdom, and it had this very provocative opening. as it is being used today, artificial intelligence is fundamentally incompatible with any modern notion of civil rights. The idea that you might be denied a job or a loan, or that you might receive additional scrutiny from the police, you have no control over that. And I know this because some of that were my companies. One of my most successful companies was using AI in hiring. My customer wasn't you. My customer was Google and Citibank and Nestle. So we built an AI that figured out who they should hire. We didn't build an AI to tell them to hire you. So, and my new companies working in health, working on Alzheimer's, working on postpartum depression and more. Let's say you go to a different doctor because you want another diagnosis, but they're just running the exact same AI algorithm. So you get the exact same diagnosis. And probably if you're in America, your insurance company is not going to pay for it anyways. So what are we going to do? So the end of that essay, my argument was, just as we have a right to a doctor or a lawyer acting solely in our interest, access to AI acting only for us must be a civil right itself. Otherwise, civil rights just doesn't make sense. If groups that you might be concerned about, that I am concerned about, are making decisions in 50 milliseconds in a server farm in Wyoming, and you never even knew that decision was being made, how would you be able to take action against it? So in that spirit, I've tried to do something different. With my company, Dionysus Health, that's working on postpartum depression and epigenetics, I made a promise before we ever founded the company. At the same time, we would found an independent, nonprofit, what's called a data trust. And it, not my company, would own all of the data and run all of the algorithms. And its sole reason for existing, in fancy language, its sole fiduciary responsibility is the mothers from whom that data is coming. So legally, we've created a legal framework in which our AI's sole purpose is to help the health outcomes of those moms. I actually happen to believe it's actually a good business decision. If we stop arguing over who owns the data and instead thought, does my AI save lives? Is it actually making people's lives better? Is my business based on having the best product, or do I have some unique data set that no one else has that I stole from someone else anyways? Well, if we could stop arguing about that, we could build systems that were genuinely meant to help people. Now, I realize I'm being a little idealistic about it here, but part of what I wanted to just show is someone could found a company based on artificial intelligence and make an explicit commitment that it would only serve the interests of the people that we were trying to help. We're going to make lots of money. We have the only test in the world, and it's a test for a condition that saves lives. So if we can't make a business out of that, we should stop pretending to be business people. I don't need to also sell people's data. I don't need to also abuse the data and trick them into doing things. So this is hard. This knowledge of how to build an AI is out there in the world. And the ability to do it at massive scale is controlled by a very small number of organizations and countries. What are we in Mexico, in the United States, around the world, all of the rest of us are going to decide is how this AI is going to affect our lives. And I'm not saying this, again, as someone that is reflexively against AI. It's amazing what it can do. We have a right to its benefits in our lives. But we also have a right to decide what those benefits should be for ourselves, and the trust to know that that is happening in the way we want it to happen. So the simple truth is, people are going to abuse this stuff. What we need to decide is, what are the rules we want to put in place that bring the most benefits while minimizing the harms as much as possible. And unfortunately, right now, we live in a world where people like Elon Musk and Sam Altman on one day are warning about the evils of AI as they themselves are building them, which should make us very suspicious. When Sam Altman, actually just before my op-ed came out, Sam Altman in an interview said, will judges be able to subpoena your AI, your personal assistant, so that they'd be able to use that information against you in court? And that is a legitimate issue, also addressed in my op-ed. What I note he's not pointing out is he already has all that information and is happily using it against us. It's a little bit like the snake from the Jungle Book warning the little kid about the tiger. I'm worried about both of them. We're the ones that need the protections, not Sam Altman, and certainly not the US government. So your concerns are well-founded, but there are people trying to build these things in the world on principles other than how rich can we get and how much of the world we can take over. But in the end, it's our decisions that matter. It's our ability to collectively decide what we want these borders to be. It shouldn't be me. Just because I build them first doesn't mean I get to decide. I want this to not be treated like it's science fiction. I think we feel that way maybe today about AI, but I'll also say about neurotechnologies. Elon Musk also has a neurotechnology company. And trust me, if you didn't like having Facebook knowing everything about you, just wait until they get inside your head, literally. Let's take these issues genuinely seriously now. And ultimately, I think the best way to do it is to empower individual people to be able to truly make decisions about their own data and their own interactions with artificial intelligence, rather than broad guidelines or, on the other side, just trust me, I'm here to save the world. So I wish I had a more concrete answer for you, but all I can say is what I personally am doing, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to prove something with our new trust. So there were a number of hands up.
Okay, thank you. First,
Muy bien, gracias.
Thank you for
Primero, gracias por esta plática tan interesante. Y yo me ha apasionado la inteligencia artificial desde hace ya mucho tiempo y he estado desarrollando, de hecho, algunas herramientas o proyectos para mejorar mi propia vida. Algunas de estas han cambiado mucho mi vida. Hice algo para mejorar mi segundo cerebro en inteligencia artificial y otra herramienta para hacer que mi vida académica fuera más sencilla en el laboratorio. Pero estas herramientas solo son útiles para mí en este momento. Y
might be many people
que
doing the same as
haya
I am
mucha
doing
gente
at this moment,
haciendo lo mismo
but
que yo
we
estoy
don't have the
haciendo
resources
en
that
este
Elon
momento,
Musk
pero no
have
tienen los
or
recursos,
Mark
no tenemos los
Zuckerberg. So
recursos que tiene Elon Musk
I
o que tiene
really
Mark
would
Zuckerberg.
like
Y me
to
gustaría
help other
mucho
people
ayudar a otras personas
to have these tools to make their
tengan
lives
estas
better.
herramientas para que mejoren sus
But my
vidas también.
question for
Pero
you
mi
is,
pregunta, la pregunta que te tengo es,
what or
¿qué
where should I
o dónde
start
debería
if I
empezar
want
si lo que quiero
to have
es
an
tener
impact on
un
the
impacto
AI world?
en el mundo de la inteligencia artificial?
What should be my first
¿Cuál
steps?
debería
Where
ser,
can I
cuáles
go?
deberían ser mis primeros pasos? ¿A dónde puedo
all
ir?
of that.
Yeah, so there are different ways to answer that question. One is whether you specifically want to have an impact in the AI world, and even then we could break it up. Do you mean the bleeding edge mathematical researchers that are looking at convergence proofs and complexity theorems around what's possible with given structures, or the build community that's really going out and trying to make something. And even then, I would say that there's a whole other space, which is just going and building things that they happen to use AI as secondary, that they solve a problem of interest is primary. So that's really what that latter group was, what it was the experience for me. I didn't plan on studying machine learning. I couldn't have. I was a big science fiction nerd as a kid, so of course I'd read. I don't know what the first thing. There is an AI in an episode of Star Trek. Maybe that was the very first AI I'd ever seen. There's the AI in 2001, but as a very little kid, I probably wouldn't have watched that movie. But that was my and most people's introduction to artificial intelligence. For me, it's interesting and noteworthy that AI was a secondary thing. I was studying brains and people, and then I got introduced to this specific subfield, theoretical neuroscience, where, kind of like theoretical physics, we would use mathematical principles to study the brain. And it turns out, if that's where you're starting from, then you very quickly become machine learning researchers, because it's mathematically principled, and it looks like the brain does something at least roughly similar to that, especially for early vision and early audition. So then for me, AI was always a tool. It was always a way to understand something else. So that is and how I have always engaged with it. In this way, it's kind of funny, because then I get introduced as being an AI expert. Well, let's be fair, there are people that spend every minute of their life working on the next LLM or the next generative model. Actually, the guy who came up with the original diffusion model is a former lab mate of mine. He's the original first author on the very first paper, a brilliant guy who then wrote a whole essay apologizing for it later because of how he didn't like how it was being used. And he put a lot of work, for example, into using AI modeling in education. That was something he thought was worthwhile, whereas putting artists out of business didn't feel like a great job to him. So there are all these different ways you could go about doing it. And I'm not saying my way is the right way. The right way for you is kind of where you want to take it. There are communities out there, kind of around the world, that are in these build spaces. I'm sure, for example, that there are Reddit communities working on stuff like this, although you couldn't get me to spend 30 seconds on Reddit for anything ever. So, yeah, there's a lot at UC Berkeley. There is a really vibrant community of hackers that just get together. So I'm the chair of the Neurotech Collider Lab at UC Berkeley, the chair of the external board, and what we do is just students from across the university, the Neuroscience Institute, the School of Engineering, even the business school, they all come together, they form up a team, and they try and build a product, and then we take it from there, and it's really cool. Most of what they come up with doesn't go anywhere. Some of it's genuinely interesting, and a whole lot of it uses, you can't do modern-day neuroscience without machine learning. But there are, in the computer science department at Cal, we have a whole new school of data and society where people are doing stuff like it. I'm not pitching you on Cal, but I bet there's a hacker culture around here that's doing that same sort of thing, of building and trying out ideas and seeing what connects. You don't happen to be down the street from a $1 billion venture fund that could look at it, but I know there's some money in this town, and there's probably some VCs that are playing around here looking for interesting ideas. I will simply say, whatever approach you take, put the problem first. AI is super cool, but again, it's still a tool. Overwhelmingly, the hardest thing is finding the right question. When Amazon tried to hire me to be their chief scientist, one of the projects I would have run is a deep neural network that would help speed up their hiring process. That would filter out who they ought to bring in for interviews. And I saw what they were doing with it, and I told them at the time, this isn't going to work. And then it actually came out publicly that it would not hire women, which is exactly what I expected. But they're not necessarily bad people, so they did everything you're supposed to do. They took out all the women's colleges and all the names of everyone off. They took out everything that could trigger a human being so you could see that this job applicant was a woman, and the AI did something amazing, something no human could do. It figured out who was a woman and wouldn't hire them. So why did the whole system fail? Because Amazon hired a bunch of brilliant, young, largely men. That doesn't make them bad, but it just was the case. And for the 7 years prior to that, working on their PhDs, their advisor had said, all right, we're going to build an AI, and it's going to identify all of the dog breeds in photographs, which is an actual competition at ICLM every year. And here is all of the training data. Here's all of the right answers. And the question, is there a dog in this picture? And if there is, what breed is it? Never. That's a perfect example of a well-posed question. Amazon was confronting an ill-posed question. How could an AI improve our hiring? And the first thing you have to do there is figure out what the right question is. What Amazon chose was, let's build an AI and train it on who got a promotion in their first year at Amazon. Well, guess what? The single biggest correlate of getting a promotion in your first year at Amazon is being male. So that's what the AI learned. No matter what they did, no matter how they tried to retrain it, that's all it would learn. Because it doesn't know what makes a great employee. It just knows the correlations. Same as GPT. It doesn't know language. It knows the correlations that produce the next best word. Both of them did amazing things. One dramatically wrong, but still kind of amazing. And the other, it produces errors. Again, if we misunderstand a large language model as actually a reasoning machine that's really, truly thinking things out, then you're mystified as to why it just makes things up every now and then and completely confabulates. So when you're working on a problem, start question first. What is the problem that I want to solve so much that I'm willing to put time into it, even if no one ever knows that I did? And if this is a problem, why is it a problem? Why haven't we figured it out? Because if it's still a problem today, that almost certainly means no one is thinking about it correctly. So now you have a place where you can build some really cool AI to do something interesting. Only once you've reached that point. So I wish I had a recommendation for a bunch of really cool communities for you to connect with here in Mexico, around the world. I have the social skills of an autistic badger. I fake it incredibly well on a stage, but I enjoy talking to random people about as much as I enjoy poking out my eyes. So I love going into my lab all by myself and building something new. And then I turn it loose into the world and see if it actually works and learn from that. And then people come to me and talk to me about that thing that I built and how it worked and maybe a way to do it better. So maybe I am suggesting that also is don't just build a thing, release it into the world. There's nothing like the learning experience of releasing something and seeing it getting used or not, and then studying why it worked or didn't, and trying again and again. because it takes a long time to get good at this stuff. The solving of the problem stuff. The AI stuff also takes a long time. But it will inevitably connect you into community, which I can say as someone genuinely on the spectrum, and yet I get to travel around the world. World leaders ask my opinions about things. That should scare all of us. And yet it happens, despite my total lack of social skills, despite the fact that I don't network with anyone, because I build things and I put them out into the world. People come to me. And you should give that a try.
I have two questions.
Tengo dos preguntas.
One is,
Claro.
did you say that
La primera,
Google Maps is
¿viste que
continuously,
Google Maps
making mistakes?
comete errores
Is it that?
continuamente?
Because I think I read
Porque
one
creo
time
que
that
leí en una
Waze is continuously
ocasión
building
que
up traffic jams.
crea
And then the second question is
embotellamientos
very
todo el
basic.
tiempo. Y la segunda
I just
pregunta
wanna
es muy
know,
básica.
I'm not trying
Quería
to be funny, but
saber, y no
would you
intento ser
recommend
gracioso
me,
aquí, o hacer un chiste, pero quería saber si me
paying
pudieran
for, those
recomendar
AI things that
un
build up your
juego
resume,
para
so
ese
when
tipo de
an
cosas
AI
de
reads
artificiales
it,
que
you
te
actually
hacen
get
como
the
un
job?
currículum para que la inteligencia
Okay,
artificial que te ayude a realmente conseguir un empleo?
So to the first one, I think the problem of automated navigation systems, paradoxically sometimes making traffic worse, is exactly some of the issue with AI. That as it gets built, in a way, I'm actually going to return it and say it's a problem with us. We thought, oh God, if only I knew that secret fastest route that only the locals knew, then I could get around. But then if you make that available to everybody, things go awry. And often people building these systems don't really think through the chain of causation that runs out from there. So my comments earlier, for example, about inexperienced early career workers being harmed by the AI, the very AI that's helping them do their job, because it's robbing them of the chance to learn how to do their job, I think is a very similar phenomenon. All these unintended negative consequences. It's one of the reasons why, while I'm not reflexively supportive of the idea that we should sandbox all new AI, so this is idea much like drug discovery, where we should test it extensively before it gets released into the wild, one of the reasons I don't believe in it is just, how are you going to stop everyone at this university, much less everyone in the world, from building AI? There's no realistic constraint on it. But it has implications. And I alluded to one earlier, Google Maps causing cognitive decline. So one of the things we know is good for long-term cognitive health is navigating through space. Well, if you're using an AI to tell you when to make your turns, then you're not doing that anymore. So here's how I use Google Maps. So I'm not saying Google Maps is bad. I get to be a native everywhere I go. In every city in the world, I can open up my phone and it can tell me how to get to where I want to go. Not always the best route, but a good enough route. And the way I use Google Maps is I open it up, I look at its route, the way I use it at home. When I'm in a new city, I don't do terrible things to myself. When I'm at home, I open it up, I check out to make certain there isn't a traffic jam or something. And then I try and beat Google Maps. It's given me its route and how long it thinks I will take. And then I think, what do I know about Berkeley, California? What do I know about San Francisco? What do I know about LA that I can beat Google Maps without cheating, without speeding and driving like a crazy person? Then I have to think about it. I got the benefits of the AI telling me how traffic is and what the best route would be, but I'm still thinking deeply about the problem and reaping those benefits. So that's how I wish the people building these systems thought through them as much as I'm trying to. The overwhelming ethic in AI development right now, and technology development writ large, is make life easier. I hope I have convinced someone here today that we should actually build technology to make life more challenging in a productive way. And that's what I'd love to see out of Waze and Google Maps. And then the other one is, I mean, the dirty truth is yes. Because most of the AI working in hiring today is bad. It's lazy, it's unscientific, it's unproven, and it's largely just looking for keywords on your resume. Absolutely, you could have GPT all by itself read through your resume and help you optimize it. Now, the very things that it would optimize are the things we shouldn't be using in hiring. What does a recruiter do when they look at a resume? They give you 5 seconds, and they look at your name, your school, and your last job. And it turns out, once I know almost anything about you, none of those are meaningfully predictive anymore. So I can be very realistic about it and say, absolutely, Gemini and GPT could help you revise your resume, make it more likely to get hired. But what it's going to do is implant aspects that recruiters respond to that are not, in fact, predictive of whether you're actually good at the job. So feel free, play the game on the system. But in reality, here's what I tell all of my students: don't get a job with a resume. Get them to come to you. Go build something. In fact, this may seem a little off topic, but when we look at women and wage gap penalties between men and women, when you turn that around and you look at employees that are actively recruited, wage gap quickly disappears. When I'm not hiring a generic person to fill a job, I'm hiring you. Amazon wanted me to be their chief scientist for people. That is the only way I tell my students to get a job. Now, I also want to be realistic. Most people don't have the privilege of doing it that way, but I strongly recommend that you don't march through the front door with a resume. You come in the back door because people there wanted you to be there. It's just, it doesn't compare in terms of the career outcomes that emerge from it. But genuinely, you are right in speculating. GPT actually does a pretty spectacular job in polishing resumes.
Okay.